A ray of light caught in a crack in the mirror to her left. Maria's eye flicked up as her chest rose with a cold anticipation. Footsteps echoed out into the main arterial. Through the grating and the dimly lit red emergency lighting, she could easily count a dozen or more. The comms implant near her left temple felt warm as she braced against a side door, her shot bolter clutched in her armoured gloves as if it were the most precious thing she had ever held. With a hiss of static in her ear, a voice snapped out, "Squad 1, enfilade, enfilade!" Without hesitation, Maria's boot slammed against the door as she forced her way into the middle of the wide corridor. The stragglers of the group, hearing the door slam, glanced over their shoulders just as Maria's finger squeezed the trigger. "By his light," she muttered in reverence as her weapon's muzzle exploded with noise. In less than 2 seconds, 10 rounds of fragmentation bolt shells tore through the backs of the group. Completely taken by surprise, the rear 6 instantly fell, while the front of the group darted to the side into alcoves and side rooms, screaming at each other to respond. One tried to carry on running straight down the passage, and Maria's final shot found him in the back of the legs. To her right, Sister Alicia burst from another side door, bringing to bear her own weapon, nooked into a plasteel shield held aloft protecting her front, the polished aquila adorning her shield, gleaming through the fumes towards the muffled shouting and screaming down the now blood-stained corridor. "Mag out!" Maria snapped, slamming her back against the wall to reload, as Alicia advanced forward, chanting the litany of purification, a small pilot light flickering by the muzzle of her flamer. Panicked shouts rang out in front as the smell of promethium diffused out across the enclosed space as the group of people ahead got wind of the dire fate awaiting them. With a click, a hiss, and a thud, Maria drove a fresh mag home. Alicia's weapon ejected a streak of flame, and a tossed sticky grenade landed directly between the two armoured women. With a shriek of warning, Maria dived back into the side room, clenching her teeth as the grenade exploded. As Maria turned, clutching her weapon to her chest, a blast of superheated force launched her head forward into the room, crashing against shelves of stacked supplies. Her ears ringing and the taste of blood inside her mouth, she felt a terrible stabbing pain near her left calf. Screams of outrage and livid shouts came from the corridor as Maria staggered to her feet. Gasping into the vox, she yelled out, "Alicia!" The implant hissed again, but she ignored it. Peeking the doorway with her weapon, she strafed into the corridor, now aflame. Alicia lay face down, her helmet 3 meters away, her hair almost all burned away. 2 men and a woman charged out of cover, their clothes and faces badly burnt. They rushed away from the ignited tank of Alicia's weapon, screaming as they rushed her, and for the first time Maria saw that something was off with the shape of their heads. With a growl, she shot each of them in the chest. If they'd rather die by the bolter over fire, so be it. As the final one fell to the deck, another hissing came from her implant as she dived for Alicia, not caring if there were any further hostiles in cover. 66. You have 6. The implant hissed as Maria desperately dislodged Alicia from her weapon and the fire. Turning her over, she grimaced as she saw Alicia's face, smeared with blood, burns, and a faint scowl, her one open eye looking behind Maria as another gout of fire and shrieks could be heard at the other end of the corridor, where it intersects with another tributary passage. "Second group down!" Sister Alicia's clipped voice spoke out of the vox. "Regrouping!" Maria felt a gust of air flow as the bulkhead at the end of the passage behind them opened and slammed shut again, disgorging Sister Alicia, bedecked in pearl-white battleplate as she strode towards them, mag clamping a mini-flamer to her left thigh, a bolt pistol in her right gauntlet. As Maria struggled to drag Alicia by the shoulders, pain lancing down her leg as smoke slowly filtered up into the air ducts, obscuring the rest of the corridor, the approaching figure slowly raised a bolt pistol, aimed right at Maria. Disbelief and fear jolted in through Maria's chest as she sharply inhaled, her eyes flashing wide. "You should have watched your back more carefully," her implant hissed at her, as Sister Alicia took aim and fired. Maria instinctively dropped Alicia's weight and actually flinched before twisting her bolter back towards the flames. With a bark from Alicia's bolt pistol, Maria just made out a silhouette in the smoke, fall backwards onto the deck, still smoking with spilt promethium. Panting, Maria kept her gun aimed towards the smoke as Alicia marched up beside them, her helm lenses sweeping over Sister Alicia's form. "Sister, can you stand?" Alicia's voice clipped out over the vox. "We have 60 seconds before the warp engines are cut." Alicia groaned, opening her other eye. Forcing herself to her knees, Sister Maria, shamed from her moment of fear, felt the adrenaline in her body wane and the agony of her leg intensify. "My leg is hit!" A note of ferocity in Maria's voice, masking an edge of anxiety beginning to bite. "Emperor help us, we have to get out of here," she thought. Sister Alicia bent down to her hospitalitas satchel, drawing out her auto-injector, and without saying a word, plunged the tip in between the plates, protecting Maria's knee, flooding her leg's body glove with anesthetic wound foam, before grabbing her by the wrist, pulling her to her feet, and jabbing another shot into her neck. Not expecting the second injection, Maria started, taking a step back, noticing her left leg felt heavy while the rest of her vision sharpened and her pulse quickened. Elysia, shield up! Maria, you're now our mid-range, I'll take point! Unhitching her power maul, Elissa passed the brutal melee weapon to Elysia's outstretched gauntlet, her face a screwed-up grimace from the burn running down one side. Elissa gave her a shot in the neck too. Elysia rolled her shoulders. Forward, sisters! Elissa's voice reverberated, readying her bolt pistol and glancing at a display on her left forearm. The embarkation deck is just 200 meters! The echo of the Battle Sisters' boots reverberated throughout the metal superstructure of a vessel whose fate has now become significantly uncertain. 6,000 kilometers away, separated by the tumultuous eddies of the warp, the Mechanicus vessel, the Fidelius Computation, appeared to glide through the Immaterium. Its vast, angular, functional design at odds with the extravagant Gothic embellishment of the ship it now drew close to. Having pierced the veil into the Immaterium together, the vessels of the 7th Convocation Fleet of Cardinal Euphrates Dionysius III sought to restore faith and re-entrench imperial culture unto the liberated worlds of the Sabbat sector. If the desolation of these worlds at the hands of the arch-enemy were to be undone, a spiritual crusade, not simply a military one, is surely demanded by the faithful of He on Terra. And so the High Ecclesiarch bid the Cardinal embark upon a grand tour across the borders of the Sabbat sector, before reuniting with the faithful upon worlds liberated by crusade forces. At each world the Cardinal spoke, drawing millions to his sermons and thousands of pilgrims to the holds of his flagship. The cardinal world of Thraxus Prime, home to Cardinal Dionysius, was blessed by the High Ecclesiarch with 6 warships of the Adeptus Sororitas, accompanied by elements of the Administratum, Imperial Guard reinforcements, and 1 geoengineering ship of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Rumours abound in the wider Imperium were that a saint had been revealed by the God Emperor, his light manifesting in 1 woman who even now stood against the archenemy, alongside the Imperial Guard throughout the last several months of the Sabbat Worlds Crusade. Such providence is a sin to ignore, and the Sabbat worlds will once again become a beacon of faith to the Imperium. High Data Adept Row 69-X21 reflexively stretched mid-air. Suspended by the absence of gravity, her limbs pulled gently on the dozens of noospheric jack lines integrated into data ports distributed along her spine. With a gentle thought, the lines gently pulled her down a few inches to once more settle her body against a cushioned recliner couch of antique synth leather and alabaster, a rare extravagance and a nod towards an old human yearning for comfort, a sensation, amongst many, Ro opted to leave unaugmented, unlike so many of her order. The spherical room around her was completely sealed off from the vibrations of the wider ship. Her body fully integrated into the noosphere, Ro was the ship. Every electrical circuit was an extension of her veins, her blood, the motive force pumping through the many ship's systems, her heart, the Mars pattern fusion reactor embedded in the ship's core, and her eyes stretched forward, beyond the prow of the vessel, magnified by radio wave and encrypted tight beam vox signal, the seat of the Cardinal's power, a cathedral in space, the immaculate purity was within her augmented visual range. The Immaterium filtered from her field of view by algorithmic purity code scrubbers, Ro felt her mind caress against the vox receiving antenna of the Immaculate, and she delicately felt the awareness of her body grow. Like flowing water seeking out each and every tributary, passage, nook and cranny, she felt her senses extend and seep into the motive force of the Immaculate Purity. Never before had she managed such a feat achieved at this scale and distance while within the Immaterium. The warp was notably calm throughout this voyage. The usual ghost echoes and signal distortions that often disrupt attempts at short-range tight beam transmission between ships in the warp were all but a soft buzzing in the foreground of the signal's connection that she allowed her consciousness to flow out across. Such technology was beyond the majority of the Imperium and the Adeptus Mechanicus. Ro allowed herself to revel in the thrill of her subtlety. Like her ancestors, she was devoutly dedicated to preserving her secrets. Her eyelids fluttered as she pulsed a packet of encrypted penetrator code across the tight beam connection. 6 lines of code with 6 command-level access function buffers indexed with 6 inquisitorial code ciphers. Subconsciously, she smiled, her awareness condensing to the primary embarkation arterial and the implant hidden in the flesh of her associate. As she watched from afar, blind to her immediate surroundings, the sigils and wards traced geometrically on the walls of her spherical noosphere interface chamber pulsed ever so faintly blue. a slight dusting of frost crystallizing on the metal catwalk beneath her recliner. A relic of the conclave of Cyclophraphi, Rose's new spheric cogitator hummed with a sharp intensity as she let her digitized voice whisper out across the void. "Get to the embarkation deck, get to Shuttle 62, and I'll do the rest." Maria's grip on her bolter tightened as her implant sent a pulse of heat through her skull again, the hissing heralding more words from their disembodied guide. "The Cardinal is almost there, and his escort reads as non-standard." Alyssa noticed Maria's slight change in stance. "Is he safe?" she demanded, their footfalls slightly denting the deck as they marched up towards the embarkation bay portal. Sister Maria nodded curtly as she thumbed the great door's control room. She touched the side of her temple, her helm clamped to her left thigh. "Seal the door behind us if you can," an edge to her voice. As the great door slowly opened, a slight rumbling pulsed through the deck, akin to the quake tremors she would often experience on her homeworld. Maria looked over her shoulder as she felt another small shake and heard a faint screeching from afar that she couldn't quite tell if it was part of the ship's cacophony or something else. It had been a week since they had entered the warp, departing the Imperium's holdings and crossing the Gulf of Stars for the Sabbat worlds, and in that time, Squad Seraphim had noticed disquieting signs amongst the ship's complement of pilgrims accrued over the last months of the Cardinal's tour. What had previously been chalked up to the expected attrition of taking on board more fanatical pilgrims than could be properly logistically handled had become a chilling concern when the fourth member of Squad Seraphim, Alyssa's own sister by blood, at least what was left of her, was found in one of the many shrine chapels scattered throughout the Cardinal's flagship. Shivering, Maria pulled away from that particular memory. Nothing good could come from dwelling on it. Over the next few days, the ship appeared to suffer multiple mechanical irregularities. At first, the lighting ship-wide would erratically face brownouts, then doors that should be easily accessible would appear to malfunction, disregarding established security codes or simply standing there like new walls, unresponsive to maintenance or inspection. During one of the most recent nights on board, the air circulating the Sororitas barracks section after the engine block experienced near life support compromising swings in temperature, enough to wake the squad in a startled rush. After donning their plate and investigating the engine control room where the engine seers typically worked among their menials, servicing the great starship's thrusters and power distribution grid, she remembered how they had found the huge area just deserted. Incidents from the pilgrims had thankfully declined soon after the ship had entered the warp. Maria had felt relief that the incident and attrition rate of the faithful horde had stabilised. The solidarity and faith on what they had all set out to achieve had surely helped bond fellowship amongst the faithful. But alas, this verse is relentlessly seeking to test our hearts. That night, Maria had had a dream. An unimaginable, unescapable shadow had chased her across the world of her birth. An arid, blasted plain of a world that barely saw darkness. She had tried to outrun the shadow, playfully at first, as a child, but as it fell across her, she noticed her vision starting to darken. Panicking, she had tried to outrun the shadow, to step back into the light, but to no avail. The shadow overtook the surrounding light, the stars, everything. She had ran until her vision had completely abandoned her. Left with nothing but complete blackness, she had awoken, brow sweating, hurriedly mouthing a prayer to the God Emperor. She had never had such a dream before. It had felt too real. Her eyesight took longer than normal to adjust to the darkness after she awoke, in the pitch dark of her squad's quarters. It was then that her implant had begun hissing, with far from ideal news. With a mighty mechanical click, the inner pressure seal disengaged, and the primary portal separating the embarkation deck to the main arterial fell away. Maria's shoulders tightened. The other sisters didn't move at all. The primary embarkation deck was itself the size of 3 football stadiums set side by side. The space was sporadically filled by ornate Gothic pillars delineating the vertical space with an intricate maze of shuttle staging ramps, launch rails and cranes. It was a sight they had seen only once when first arriving to serve their security assignment. On each side of them, bisecting the ship, were 2 void-facing windows, each the length of a small city block. Void shields, coupled with magnetic containment nodes, served to keep the vacuum of space at bay, isolating great portions of the embarkation deck from the launch zones. But the giant mechanical void shutters, critical in the event of any power outage, had for some reason had all been left open. As the door opened, a garish tinge of vibrant pink light fell across Maria's face. Her shoulders tightening, she stiffened as the other sisters froze, processing what they saw before them. "Emperor, guide my hand," Alicia rasped. Sister Alyssa visibly sagged her shoulders, as if in despair. Beyond the ship, the tides of the immaterium appeared to roil and caress the outer shielding of the ship, almost lovingly teasing the outer edge of the vessel's Gellar field. The pink light seemed to penetrate each surface Maria looked at, producing a fuzzy after effect and artifacts in her vision. The light was somehow nauseating, as if every diffuse reflection was a heresy in itself, saturating the pallor of everything in her field of view, and yet difficult to look away. Before them, filling the entire deck, were rows upon rows of pilgrims, all in a perfect circular pattern, each on their knees, their heads prone as if in the middle of worship. There must have been 1,000 of them. All their movements were in sync with each other, as if their movements were some painstakingly rehearsed choreograph. At the centre of the circular rings of pilgrims, a makeshift dais had been erected, and perched on top was what looked like a monster out of some dreadful nightmare. It had 6 limbs, the foremost pair looking more like swords than legs. Its body was covered in black carapace, insectoid-like scales, and its face had far, far too many eyes. Every emperor-cursed contour of its body looked terribly sharp and jagged. Maria felt the colour in her face drain away. Her heart thudded loudly in her ears. The sisters all glanced at each other in shock, not sure how to proceed. The Xenos creature was just sitting there, staring out into the warp as if transfixed. Despite the deafening noise of the embarkation door opening, it and the pilgrims made no sound, nor moved at all, or showed any sign that they had noticed their presence at all. Elysia made to take a step forward, her shield raised and gauntlet creaking with the pressure she held her power maul. Sister Alyssa sharply touched her shoulder, eyes locked ahead, past the drooling monster, to the other side of the deck, where a set of doors suddenly parted. There was no mistaking him. The Cardinal and his entourage quickly stepped into the embarkation deck, apparently completely unconcerned with the mass of pilgrims, nor apparently that of the presence of a Xenos abomination. A hissing suddenly punctured the moment. Maria's implant buzzed. You need to prep extraction of the target as soon as possible. It's a stroke of luck he's decided to come to the embarkation deck now of all times. Maria signed to the others to take cover. This was wrong. Everything about this screamed wrong. What the hell was happening? Sit rep! Alyssa hissed, eyes darting about the space for signs of impending violence. I don't understand, Sergeant, Maria actually gabbled, a hysteric note colouring her words. Our orders were to rendezvous with the Cardinal, escort to embarkation and await extraction. How could they have known? I don't... Alyssa grabbed Maria by the shoulder guards and hissed, It, sister, it! We must tactically frame all possible outcomes as if they are a single it. Maria felt her hands go slightly numb. Alyssa's words seemed to wash over her as if they were a warm summer wind, billowing past the locks of her hair. She blinked, noticing Sister Elysia was on one knee. She looked back at Alyssa with a grimace of confusion, forcing herself to remain grounded to the present moment. Alyssa suddenly quieted, noticing that her breath had become visible and was now fogging up her helm lenses. She tore off her helmet and appeared to steady her gait. Maria! My mission chrono timer has been at T-minus 58 seconds for what feels like the last 10 minutes. 1,600 kilometers. 1,599 kilometers. 1,598 kilometers. The holographic display, updating the spatial displacement between the target ship and the Fidelis computation, emitted faint diffuse blue light, diffracting from the retina of Ro's one augmented eye, painting shimmering faint pinpricks of light amongst the walls of her isolation chamber. Her body had floated up off the couch again, the Newspheric cogitator now whining in a slightly discordant rhythm. A single bead of sweat dislodged from Ro's skin as her head appeared to involuntarily twitch. The etched sigils along the interior walls glowed more noticeably now, frost beginning to appear along the bottom of the jacklines snaking up into her spinal column. Ro, that is to say, High Data Adept Ro 69-X21, took a slow, deep, grounding breath and probed the tight beam line again for artifacts. It was as if each time she extended her awareness across the link to communicate with Maria's implant, she had to increase the power draw and simultaneously reduce the ship-to-ship distance. At this rate, her access will soon be severed, no matter how close she positioned her vessel. Another bead of sweat broke the surface tension of her face and spun away in the zero-G. According to the ship's chrono, the interdiction sequence should have executed minutes ago. Another bead of sweat broke free from Ro's forehead. this time floating towards the ceiling. If the Purity's warp engines are cut, and my interdiction sequence tether is simultaneously severed, Ro mused, wondering what would be worse, reporting the loss of the Purity to unknown coordinates in deep space overtaken by subversive elements, or pivoting her distinguished career into that of a technocratic pirate renegade, alienated from both the Imperium and those subservient fools on Mars. Ro took another graceful breath, and gingerly allowed part of her awareness to flutter out across her tight beam connection, pretending to ignore the faint yet unmistakable sound of soft, girlish laughter now consistently echoing in the higher frequencies of her ship-linking signal. Maria fingered the chain on which a golden Aquila pendant sat over the jet-black adamantine surface of her cuirass. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the Cardinal slowly approach the centre of the embarkation deck, a stunning absence of fear across his face. Maria's eyes slid back to Alyssa, who for the first time she can remember appeared to be adrift, her will appearing to flicker like a candle flame in a precarious breeze. "Plans rarely survive contact with the enemy," Maria dryly intoned. "It is what we do by the Emperor's will when all seems lost that our faith matters most." Maria briefly closed her eyes, inclining her head down a fraction as a serene sensation of faith rippled down her back, erupting into pleasurable gooseflesh and chills. In that moment, she felt utterly calm. Her sisters seemed to feel it too. They nodded together, with expressions of serene certainty, almost cold in its clarity. The Cardinal staggered a few dozen meters away from the dais, eyes snapping to the Xenos with a gaze that now firmly acknowledged its reality. He squinted, the warp light from outside the ship painting him in an almost monochrome relief. Each ray appeared to cast no shadow. His entourage was right by him, just a moment ago. He twisted his head back towards the door he had passed through. Over the heads of hundreds of praying pilgrims, he saw his entourage, all on one knee, heads bowed, eyes glassy, almost in repose. He turned back to the dais again, his head and sense of continuity attempting to reassert itself, his throat seemingly swelling in his neck to almost choke him. He fought to keep down his boiling sense of terror when he caught the eye of a pilgrim. The sole man had raised his head up from the ground, his body still in a position of worship. His mouth was slightly open, his expression glassy, except for his eyes, which had now locked onto the Cardinal, tracking his movements with the focus of a slaved turret. Turning back to the dais, the Cardinal staggered back half a pace. Floating completely stationary, facing directly at him not 2 meters away, was the Xenos creature. It was held aloft as if by its skull, the rest of its limbs folded neatly at its sides. Unmoving, its multitude of black eyes appeared completely non-functional, yet he had the awful certainty it knew perfectly well that he was there. Ro's hissing voice crackled inaudibly in Maria's head as she watched, appalled at what was happening. It appeared as if the alien creature had flickered instantly from a seated position to suddenly floating right in front of the Cardinal. Its cranium appeared to swell considerably, and a crackling of light and sparks appeared to flicker about its engorging head. Out of the corner of her eye, Maria noticed a few pilgrims had twisted their necks up to stare at her. Their bodies were still hunched over in a position of worship, yet their necks twisted unnaturally to jut their heads up to track her. As a few wet-sounding cracks and pops echoed about the deck, she felt a little bile tinge the back of her throat. More and more pilgrims were starting to turn their faces toward the Cardinal and her. She glanced to her sisters, wondering what they were going to do, yet Alyssa and Alicia simply stared at the Xenos, the barrel of the weapons now sagging towards the floor, as if they suddenly weighed 5 times as much to them. A single breath passed from Maria's lips, like steam in a cold air, then another. Her bolter trembled slightly in her gauntlets, not from fear, but from something subtler, a pressure, like a weight on her chest she hadn't noticed until now. The Xenos didn't move, but the space around it did. Flickers of shadow seemed to flicker out from the creature, crossing across the faces of the pilgrims as they all began to twitch. The Cardinal took a step forward. Maria opened her mouth to shout, but her implant hissed static, and her voice caught in her throat. The pilgrims began to hum, not in chorus, not in tone, but in synchrony, each vocalizing a different pitch, a dissonant wall of sound that built into a terrible resonance. The very deck beneath her boots began to vibrate. A few nearby cranes swayed on their mounting arms, clanking softly like tolling bells. Maria felt her teeth ache. Outside, the swirling colours of the immaterium seemed to roil a little more insistently, as if in sympathy. Then the creature tilted its head, and every single one of its too many eyes locked onto the Cardinal. "Emperor, shield us," Alyssa whispered. That was all Maria needed. She raised her bolter and fired. The crack of the blessed weapon shattered the hum for half a heartbeat. One sacred bolt casing spiralling through the pink haze, it struck the creature's carapace dead on. Nothing happened. The bolt froze mid-air, a foot from the Xenos' skull, suspended, hovering, and then melted. Not exploded, not deflected, just ceased to be. Maria let out a small groan. "It didn't even—" The warp screamed. Or maybe Maria did. The pillars began to bleed, thick pink ichor perspiring out of marble carved with ecclesiastical sigils. None of the sisters moved. From the rows of pilgrims, more heads turned, every head turned, necks twisting with cartilage-shattering cracks until 1,000 pairs of glassy eyes stared directly at Squad Seraphim. And the creature spoke. It actually fucking spoke, but not in sound. It spoke inside their skulls, like the most base violation. "The Sabbat, this flesh, yours, is already ours." And with a blur of motion, one of its limbs bisected the cardinal from groin to shoulder, a look of twisted agony splitting his face as the creature lifted him off the ground. The blade-like limb lodged under his collarbone. Maria staggered backwards. Her implant buzzed violently, burning like a brand inside her skull. The aquila around her neck scorched her skin. Then, a sudden pulse. Rose's voice snapped back into her mind, clearer than it had been in hours. "The nearest gen! Shoot out the nearest fucking void generator, if you can hear me!" In sheer desperation, Maria twisted her bolter's muzzle at the nearest void shield emitter node, horribly aware of the sudden movement of the pilgrims as they all began to rush her, and began to fire at each scarlet-tinged emitter she could see before spying what looked like a square cogboy box with pipes servicing an array of emitters before she screamed out to her sisters either side of her, "Maglock!" With a click, their boots locked in place. She sent the last 3 bolts of her mag into the power distribution box. Horrified by the apparent pointlessness of what she had just done, Maria threw her bolter to the deck, completely useless now that she had spent her last mag. Alicia slammed her power maul against the deck plating, sending an arc of force and lightning out in a show of defiance, raising her shield as Alyssa primed both her weapons, one in each hand, and Maria, her mouth dry, her body shaking, took out her combat knife and prepared to fight for her life. The pilgrims stampeded in their bid to reach the Battle Sisters, flowing around the Xenos Horrificus as it flicked the dying man about to be in a better view of the squad of Sororitas. With an efficient snap forward of its mandibles, the prey's neck severed, gouting the last pressure of blood out the hole where the throat had been, in a grotesque display calculated to either evoke terror or fury. The creature cared not which it was. With furious resolve, Squad Seraphim held their ground. The first 3 pilgrims to get in range each had their heads explode as Alyssa took aim and fired, making every shot count. Maria and Alicia tensed in their battle plate, either side of Alyssa, ready to die. A crush of bodies piled up against Alicia's shield, her power maul sending 2 pilgrims to the deck before 2 more threw themselves around her arm. Screaming in rage, she drove forward into the incoming horde, the powered hydraulics of her armor giving her the strength of several men. She fractured bone by simply thrashing from side to side as they swamped her. Without hesitation, Alyssa arced a continuous glut of fire in front of Alicia, Maria throwing herself between anyone attempting to grapple with Alyssa and their only remaining ranged firepower. Instead of attacking, the Xenos just floated there, facing them, as if certain there was no need to interfere. Then, the void shields on one side of the embarkation deck died. Before anyone could react, the entire embarkation deck explosively decompressed. Everything not nailed down close to the void shield failure was immediately vented into space. A full third of the pilgrims near the compromised side stood no chance and were instantly flung into vacuum. Instead of stalking prey, they now floundered, awareness slowly returning to their eyes as their limbs desperately tried in vain to claw for any purchase. The unlucky fraction that found themselves spinning in 0G thrashed in vacuum before slipping outside the Gellerfield's boundary, the warp emitting bright flashes as each soul met its fate. By only the weight of their armour were the sisters not flung into the rushing hurricane as the ship's atmosphere ripped out past them, gushing through the open arterial out into the void. Absurdly off balance, each sister was anchored to the deck by one maglocked boot, the other in mid-motion from the dance of the now stalled melee. An instant before, what was a wall of rabid flesh broke into a mess of flailing limbs and floating bodies. Maria screwed up her face against the wind, desperately gasping for any breath she could, while Alyssa flailed to reseal her helm. In the panic of simply trying not to get sucked out into space, none of them had noticed that the floating Xenos had disappeared. Alicia had somehow managed to turn her back on the vent, maglocking her other boot to the deck plate, her shield careening off into space with the 5 pilgrims that had been previously trying to scrum it from her grip. Her power maul span away, end over end, its head detonating off the floating bodies of a mass of pilgrims, misting the space with sprays of blood, now suspended as an instant later artificial gravity failed. Wordless, the Battle Sisters fought to reach the arterial portal again. By the grace of the God Emperor, the door hadn't sealed behind them. The implant was hissing constantly in Maria's ear now, but she couldn't hear anything except the howl of decompression. What surely felt like the entire air supply of the ship was sucked through the portal and out into the exposed embarkation deck. As they forced themselves over the threshold, Maria felt a terrible pressure in her lungs. As the air grew thinner, she relented and allowed her lungs to fully exhale as the last of the air seemed to scream past them. Alyssa seized Maria's wrist, forcing her over the threshold. Her boots maglocking to the other side and into the arterial, she glanced at her wrist display, then stared at the exposed side of the embarkation deck as the immaterium began to swirl and erupt, appearing to bubble away. Tendrils of pink unreality seemed to lash out at the vent in the ship, as if the warp was loath to release such a prize. Suddenly, Maria felt the pit of her stomach seemingly drop out from under her, as if the Emperor-blessed soul was pulling a high-G maneuver. The entire ship groaned and screeched. Heard through the vibration of her connected boots, she saw a black spot emerge amongst the roiling waves of unreality. It grew and spread like a maw, opening up over their entire field of view, swallowing the pink light that was their only source of illumination. With a crunch, Alicia slammed her gauntlet on the portal's control room, just as Maria started to feel her vision grow dark. With no breath left to panic, she clawed herself against the corridor's wall, away from the door and further into the main arterial, when an emergency decompression seal suddenly exploded down from above, crashing into the floor's anchor ducts to form an unbreakable seal. Maria and Alyssa glanced to their right as Sister Alicia was, within a few milliseconds, instantly crushed into the emergency seal. As a blood vessel burst in Maria's eye, and the last of her consciousness retreated, the warp-illuminated silhouette of Sister Alicia turning to face them was the last thing she saw as their world was plunged into complete darkness.